We'll be speaking with Ellycia Harrould-Kolieb. Did I get that right? Ellie is with the nonprofit organization Oceana, which is based in the United States. And this group works to improve the health of the oceans. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Oceana does, Ellie?
Oh, thank you for having me. We're actually the largest global organization that works solely on the oceans. We have offices around the US and throughout Europe, and also in Central and South America. And we really focus on preserving the health of the oceans. And one of our campaigns focuses on climate change. And so one of the main issues we're looking at is ocean acidification, which is the oceans are becoming more acidic because they're absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And that's actually a great thing for us on land because that actually lessens the impact of climate change. However, that benefit that they're offering to us means that they're actually changing for the worse. And the oceans are becoming more acidic. They're actually 30% more acidic now than they were prior to the Industrial Revolution.
That's pretty shocking. So you're a scientist. You originally are from Australia, as I think many of our guests could probably pick up on by now, and you've moved to the lovely non-seaside town of Washington, D.C. So give us just a little background on you. How does a marine scientist end up going from Australia to Washington, D.C.?
So I actually had a stopover in Berkeley on the way to Washington, D.C. To do a master's program at UC Berkeley, where I focused on conservation issues in the oceans. And then I got offered a position at Oceana, and it was too difficult to refuse, despite there being no ocean close by. But I think working with Oceana is a really wonderful way to help, to do my part to protect the oceans. Growing up in Australia, I was always on the oceans. Swimmer, I'm a scuba diver. And so once I became old enough to really understand what the issues facing the oceans were, it was only natural for me to want to help to protect them. So I think working with the Oceana is a really great way to be able to do that.
And as a scientist, what exactly is it that you do with a nonprofit organization that's trying to change policy?
Well, Oceana's a science-based advocacy organization, so everything that we do and say is based in the science. So for that reason, it's really important to have scientists on staff who can make sure everything we do really is grounded in the science. So my day-to-day job is I write a lot of reports. I analyze the science that's coming out of academic institutions and peer-reviewed science and try and put it into a format that everyone can understand. And so we can take that science to policymakers and show them how important it is for them to protect the oceans as well.
And there's clearly been a lot of discussion about science in the United States recently. Can you just clarify a little bit for our viewers at home? What exactly does that mean, peer-reviewed? What is the type, what is required for something to be scientifically proven in your mind?
Well, the process of peer review is basically where you have a paper written by a scientist or a group of scientists, and then another group of scientists who haven't been involved in that work at all review it and judge it for its accuracy. So it's actually a very rigorous process. So the, making of science is something that actually goes through a lot of different processes to make sure that it is really thoroughly vetted and can be held up by many different scientists who haven't been involved in the work. So they're independent and they review it and say, yes, this is good science. We really think it can join the body of scientific literature.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you have questions or comments, you can put those in the OneClimate.net website, or you can also use the Twitter hashtag, #OneClimate. We actually have something in already, do we not, Adam?
Yep.
Pardon me, I should have introduced my colleague, Adam Groves, who's monitoring all this, everything that's going on Twitter and OneClimate.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I've just been looking at the discussion about oceans on Twitter, and actually there's a lot of talk about the impacts, people saying it's going to tip fragile balances in marine ecosystems. Even people saying it's causing shells to grow thicker in crustaceans. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the impacts of acidification.
So ocean acidification actually has many impacts on the oceans, and one of the most significant impacts is that it reduces one of the building blocks of shells and skeletons. So it reduces the amount of available carbonate ions. And carbonate ions are vital for corals, for oysters, for lobsters, to be able to grow their shells and skeletons. And without the availability of that building block, they can't necessarily grow their shells or skeletons anymore. And so one of the most severe impacts of ocean acidification is there might actually be a mass extinction of coral reefs by the middle to end of this century. And so there are obviously going to be flow-on effects if we lose all the coral reefs in the oceans, because coral reefs are not only important in and of themselves, they're beautiful, they are in many coastal areas, so important to many countries, but they provide nurseries for really important fisheries, they provide coastal protection, they provide areas for tourism, so really important revenue from tourism for many countries. And these are just some of the importance of coral reefs. So we stand to lose coral reefs. Fish could also be impacted. It looks like there might be likely impacts to reproduction and possibly even respiration. And we're seeing changes in the way fish are able to navigate. So it looks like there could be huge impacts throughout the oceans, most significantly to marine calcifiers or creatures that create shells and skeletons. But then we're also seeing now significant impacts to many other species as well, such as fish.
As someone who comes from Minnesota, I have to ask, why do those of us in the middle of the country care?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that the oceans aren't only important to coastal people. As we just said, there's so many reasons why people on the coast care about reefs and care about the oceans. But the oceans also act to regulate climate. So the entire globe, they're regulating climate, they're regulating the amount of oxygen and the amount of carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere.
Can you just explain a little bit how that works? Just, not at a scientific level, but as for the rest of us out here.
Well, one of the things the oceans have in them are plankton, so small plants that float on the top of the oceans, and they absorb carbon dioxide and they create oxygen. So that's one of the things that the oceans does, is that it actually puts oxygen into the atmosphere that the rest of us breathe. So that's one reason why no matter where on Earth you live, you care about the oceans, because you can't live without oxygen. So
is there expected to be an impact on our food system as acidification increases?
Yes, it's likely that the food webs within the ocean are going to change and possibly collapse.
Collapse?
There is a great likelihood that they will, yes. And as we know, humans are the top of many food chains. And so it's looking like the bottom of many marine food webs have some of those marine calcifiers at the base. So if we're looking at different types of plankton, an example is pteropods that are little swimming sea snails. And so they might not seem so important to us, in and of themselves, but they're actually a vital food source of salmon. So without pteropods, salmon starve. Without salmon, we can't eat them. So there's just one example of a food web that collapse and will have significant impacts on what we choose to eat.
So even now in this era of modern technology, something like this could actually collapse entire food systems. It seems a little hard to believe for some people.
It does, and that's one of the scary elements of ocean acidification, is that we could see drastic changes throughout the oceans. Changes that have not been seen for millions of years before. And the oceans now are more acidic than they've been for at least 800,000 years, and possibly millions of years before that. So the species that are in the oceans now that are currently alive haven't seen the conditions that we're causing for them. And so it's unlikely that they're going to be able to adapt with the speed that we're really making these changes occur. And so when species can't adapt, they die out. And so we're hoping that if we can come to an agreement here in Copenhagen and really curtail our carbon dioxide emissions, that we can prevent that from happening.